So this next example is maybe a little more complicated, but pretty much the same. So what do you think will happen with this? So slightly different function, notice that. So go ahead and run it and see what happens. So this print function, the difference between print and println is that it leaves everything on the same line until you tell it not to. So if I were to change this to println, it will put a new line starting after this. So this is the same as kind of what we were doing up here. If you had put another line below, and I realized that I just did the next exercise for you, but that's okay because that's what we're doing today. So the next exercise was to think about the difference between println and print, and I just described it to you, so we'll move right along. So what you will see often in these tutorials is I will leave some code in the descriptions and ask you to copy and paste them in there and then run them, and you will see the results. So this is so that it doesn't execute and already have the answer there waiting for you. So you're going to be doing this a lot throughout the course. I would suggest pausing the video, playing around with this, getting used to it before you move any further. All right, so I'm going to assume that you've played around with that a little bit. And I just want to take a side note, and I kind of introduced in this beginning, but I'm going to continue to, as it is relevant, give you tips and tricks as well as best practices. So here's our first tip. So when you're trying to find out a new thing about programming, one of the best things you can do is just articulate the exact question you have as though you were going to ask it to somebody who knew the answer, and just Google it. So the first exercise we're going to do is, how do I get the square root of a number in Julia? So kind of breaking this down, how do I get the thing that I want and then just put in the programming language you want as in there somewhere, and Google will figure that out. So we will do that. And usually the first answer, probably all of these, if you were to read them, would probably all give you the answer. So cool, it's given us a function that's probably built into the Julia programming language. Oh, there it is, it's inbuilt. So we can just copy this code in there. X, I'm going to run that. Obviously, we don't have an X. It doesn't know about that. We haven't defined X. So we could put in the numbers that we want. So there we go. We have now got the square root of 25. So we have our function. It has one input. It gives us the output. By default, these Jupyter notebooks print things out. You'll see, so in the previous example, we had strings in there. We could also do that, and it will do the same thing. So it has print this out. Println is smart enough to figure out what this thing is and to convert it to text. Doing things like this sometimes makes sense, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes we will do it a slightly different way, but I will not get ahead of myself. What I will say is functions can take functions as their parameter. So this thing is executed first. So at first it executes the square root, it gives a value, and then println executes on that value. So don't get too confused by that syntax. That would be similar to if I was to just be like a sine of exp, meaning exponential of x, or even a tried and true ln. So functions can take in as parameters other functions, just like in math. So just wanted to clear that up before I went any further as I did that. But we can just leave that like that. One thing to note, I had it before up here. If I undo what I've done, all this stuff, you'll actually see I did it once without even thinking about it or mentioning it. So you can put what is called a comment. So anything that happens after a pound sign in Julia will be ignored by the computer. So I could put print ln hello there, and nothing's going to happen. But when I take it out of the comment, it does happen. So comments are useful. You can remove code temporarily while you're trying to fix something, or leave some sort of message to other programmers like, hey, here's what I was thinking. This is what this is doing. Sometimes that's very helpful. I have some thoughts on when to use comments here in the software engineering concepts section. Feel free to look at that if you want. It's not explicitly necessary for what we're talking about, but there are some best practices around that. What I will say is you want code that's readable, so comments can help using good names of functions. So we will get to that here in a second. So notice they've called this print ln. It prints a line. It makes sense that that's what this does because it says what it does in the name. So I'll talk about that many times throughout this course.